at some point your means of making a living will come to an end. And the only security that you have is either a giant stack of cash or other streams of income.
March 23rd, 2020 is a day that I will never forget.
The coronavirus is the biggest threat this country has faced for decades.
A lot of you who already know me probably know that almost exactly 8 months after that date, I took a flight to San Francisco, left my family in the UK, and started working for DoorDash. It was almost definitely the most difficult decision I have ever made. And while I don't regret making the decision that I did make in that moment, I've never actually told anyone the story of what happens between March 23rd, 2020 and November 26th. That story, those 8 months, completely changed my outlook on life. On that day, the Prime Minister announced COVID measures, the first of their kind.
So it's vital to slow the spread of the disease.
Tourism completely ceased to exist. Basically, none of my clients could make it to shoots. Where that left me is with no income, no work. The protections that they had in America, the protections that they had in Europe, they didn't have those protections in Mexico, which is actually where my staff was based. Looking back, of course, I could have just let them go. Many of them had been with me for years, so I felt this obligation to them. And I added it up. Over the course of those 8 months, they cost me $24,341. I don't regret my decision for a second. I need to make sure that my staff are doing well. It's the most important thing in business, but my up where I went wrong is that I just sat on it. I believed the government that the country was just a couple of weeks away from opening back up, and in the end I had to leave my family. I'm gonna finish this tomorrow. Sorry.
I didn't mean for that to get that emotional last night. That isn't the lesson here, and I do want to clarify that the mistake was not paying my staff. I'll do the exact same thing 100 out of 100 times. The mistake was not having anything else, was just waiting for things to open back up. If you take a look at the timeline of lockdowns inside the UK, you'll see that there's a pattern. It's basically, they locked everything down for about 3 weeks at a time. At the end of the 3 weeks, said that things would be going back to normal, but then when it came back around, it just got extended for like another 3 weeks. This video is not anti-government, anti-prime minister, or even anti-COVID restrictions. I'm just trying to illustrate the time that we were living in and the reason that I continued putting off making a contingency plan. I thought that it was over. By April 30th, Prime Minister went on and announced that the peak of COVID was over and that things were going to go back to normal again.
We are past the peak of this disease, and we are on the downward slope.
June and July of 2020 were probably the most stressful months of my life. First of all, I had a baby born on June 2nd, 2020, which I don't regret either for a second. But I don't even really remember those months very much, except for the desperation. I was desperate. I was desperate for anything. I don't know how many jobs I applied to, but it was probably nearing 1,000. Despite being a theoretically successful entrepreneur, I was even applying for minimum wage barista jobs, which in hindsight sounds stupid because these places weren't even allowed to be open. August rolls around and largely things are going back to normal. That's what it feels like, at least in the UK. I got a lot of business during this period from August through parts of September. I mean, that period really actually funded our entire lives and the entire business throughout the end of November when I ultimately fled to America. But then comes mid-September, there were new restrictions put in place. The Eat Out to Help Out, the opening up in August, it had actually caused a spike in corona cases. And we were put out of business again. And you could tell that, international tourism was not coming back anytime soon. And then came the day, I think it was November 22nd, I listed my computer, sold it the next day, used that money on November 23rd to buy a flight to America that took off only 3 days later. Flew 6,000 miles to work at DoorDash. Stayed at my parents' house, borrowed my brother's truck for 1 week. In 1 week I had enough money to buy an old Prius. The next week I had enough money to pay rent and to rebuy my computer. I worked doing that for a few more months, stayed away from my family, and the rest is history. This story is not supposed to be like a poor me or a look where I came from and look where I am now. This story is the lesson that I learned over those very difficult 8 months, and that is that there are no guarantees. Your job doesn't come with any guarantees. Your business doesn't come with any guarantees. The security that the government provides does not come with any guarantees. In fact, just the opposite. One day your job will come to an end. One day your business will cease operations. One day there will be a global pandemic that shuts down your entire government. It might not be for 5, 10, 20 years down the road. The only guarantee is that that moment will one day come, and your future, your well-being, your very existence is dependent on who you are and what you have in that moment. So once I was out of the woods, think like January 2021, I immediately started diversifying my income. This is when I started filming stock video. If you haven't seen my video on how I film stock video, I'll leave the link in the description below. This is when I resurrected my web development company, Osmosis Labs. This is when I transformed my photography booking platform, Pick Your Photo. This is when I started making digital assets in a wide variety of niches, and then eventually started outsourcing the making of these digital assets, and then eventually started my outsourcing agency, Little Assistants. And over the last coming up on 3 years now, I've probably lost more streams of income than most people will ever have. So my $24,000 mistake, the thing that I will never ever do again, is being too dependent on one thing. Doesn't matter if it's a job, doesn't matter if it's a business, doesn't matter if it's entirely passive income. At some point, your means of making a living will come to an end. And the only security that you have is either a giant stack of cash or other streams of income.